And we're live. Boom. Thank you all once again for joining me today. It's been a little chilly here in Seattle. We're definitely getting into our fall season, which means hoodies, sweatshirts, scarves very quickly. So nice for so long, and now it's chilly, which is nice too. Seattle's got good weather, so I shouldn't complain. Today we're going to come up with a concept for a board game. Feel free, if you have any ideas about where we want to start our mind mapping, to throw those out. Might use that as a seed for our brainstorm for today. If not, I will come up with something shortly. Pumpkins are great this time of year. I'm a big fan of the fall season aesthetic. I think it's interesting because fall probably has one of the strongest aesthetics, if you think about it. Thematics, the fall season, right? For spring and summer, maybe a little bit for spring, you get some fresh flowers. Summer is sunny, and then winter, people want to distract themselves with holidays. They don't think about the snow and the darkness. But fall, very much so, people start to bring in the pumpkins and the leaves and the hay bales. I was at a bar over the weekend for a friend's birthday, and as we were sitting there celebrating, they were just bringing in the pumpkins and putting them on the tables and decorating, and it's a very fun experience to be a part of. I love pumpkins and gourds and making things feel seasonal. I think it's fun. It's a little harder living in an apartment, lugging those kinds of things up and down, especially if I had to go to walk to a place like Whole Foods and pick it up and walk home. But pumpkins are fun. Hello, Senor Bob. Hope that you're doing well today. Just talking about some pumpkins. Maybe design a pumpkin-themed game. Who knows? Or maybe just start with pumpkins and then end up with a game about aliens. You never know where these mind maps will end up. Pumpkin. Had the opportunity to do a online talk for an online conference called Ignite, Board Game Design Lab, on Saturday, and talked a lot about what happens on the show here: inspiration, innovation, ideation, creativity, how you can use some of the techniques that we use here to come up with ideas, the different phases that ideation can be useful. Ideation is great for coming up with new game design concepts. So what we do for this show is mostly start from scratch, throw a bunch of ideas against the wall, see what sticks, and see what churns and generates in everyone's minds. But ideation and a lot of these techniques are also good for if you need to generate a lot of content, so you're coming up with events or crises or situations for a game that has some theme and flavor to it. If you're coming up with card powers, you can do a mechanical brainstorm. If you get stuck at any point, like your game is almost there but not quite, or if you break your game, you're not sure how to move forward, then ideation and mind mapping can be great for that as well. Fall makes me think of pagan rituals. Right, we're going to start from pumpkins, go to fall, and add some pagan rituals to our mind map. Again, I never really thought about it before, about the aesthetic and how we really embrace it, and from a marketing perspective, I guess I would say, you have Christmas stuff, but it's more of a holiday, right? It's funny, we go straight from fall into Christmas, a little bit of Halloween, Thanksgiving merged into there, but both of those are very fall-esque, right? But I think what you're saying, Senior Bob, about the pagan rituals is, again, we don't have a lot of information about how things actually were in those times, because a lot of it's been erased, unfortunately, by the religions that came after. But from what we know, there's a lot of nature-based stuff, being really in tune with the seasons. For people who lived a long time ago, the seasons were very important. It was very essential to know when the seasons were changing, what that meant, how they had to respond to that. Everything from animal migrations, hunting and gathering, which fruits and vegetables, plants were going to be in season during particular times of the year, when they needed to store up for winter. Even in times with harvest, you see the seasons became even more essential, right? Like the planting, when things had to be planted, when it was safe to plant, when there was no threat of frost, when things had to be managed and maintained and kept alive, basically, so they'd eventually create food, and then the harvest season. So this fall and the feelings that come along with it, for us, having come from agrarian societies, it's very tied into harvests, right? And harvest was a time, if it was a successful harvest, that kind of a chance for a breather, right? So all throughout the spring and the summer, you're looking at these plants. Can you imagine that? Really going back, right? And living day to day, not sure of, and a lot of people still live like this in modern times, which is the tragedy, really. Living not knowing if these plants, you depend on these plants you put in the ground, and if they didn't produce, you were going to have a really rough time making it through the winter. And just the tension of that survival. Your survival resting on these plants, and the celebration. The celebration and relief, I guess I'll say, when relief of fruition. When all this hard labor and stress and work of the spring and summer seasons comes to a head, and the plants are ready to be harvested. And it's like, hey, we have a good crop, or we have a okay crop, we're gonna make it, or not such a great crop, and we gotta figure out what we're gonna do. Not so much relief then, but when things are good, definitely this feeling or experience of intense, everything is going to be okay. I'm gonna make a note of that over here. In the digital form, harvest. The emotion and the experience. And talking about that from a experiential or mechanical viewpoint, you can talk about payoffs, right? Makes me think off the top of my head of engine building games where you're building up, investing a lot. Yep, and investing until you eventually reap the rewards. You don't have a lot of control necessarily on the final outcome. You can't say, it's like, I want to produce 200 pumpkins, and you just make 200 pumpkins, right? You have to set a system in place. So you plant number of seeds that grow into a number of plants. And each one has a number of pumplins. And at every step of the way, talking about plants or gardening, there's maintenance involved. I guess this could be going back and forth between the mechanics and the theme. It could be likened to an engine builder where you're each round making your engine go off. To making an engine builder, each round you trigger engine to engine or engines. The cycles within cycles. You could also think of engine building as a whole loop, a whole year, right? You know, you set up your engine, time passes or things happen inside the engine, and on the other side of it, it produces. Also be one cycle of an engine or a system. Thinking very thematically today, if we were to talk about leaning more into a harvest and the stress and risk of it. Farming and real world harvest. Because there's the extra pressure, the survival, right? Living or dying puts a lot of pressure on a system. But it's interesting, the way most games are set up, at least strategic games, is to take away these feelings, take away the feelings of real world stress. It's stress, it's relaxation. Strategic games as being relaxing. Because they take away the real world stress of the risks of all the things that can go wrong. So I'm gonna say capital. In real life, you have insects, insects eating the plants or seeds, pests eating the fruits, weather being too dry or too wet, fungi, or molds infecting the plants. Even I'm remembering all this from books I used to read as a kid. I used to read Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House on the Prairie, and they got into some of the details and some of the things that go wrong with planting and harvest. Fire. Natural disasters. I guess I'll put fire into there. Natural disasters. Fire or storms. Dust storms. Having enough labor to harvest, which depending on the speed of when things are ready. I think in the books they used to talk about farming grains or wheat. Maybe it was corn, but there were certain things. Hay, I think, was another one. Certain things you had to harvest at a very specific time, and it had to be like, oh, it's ready, and if it rains while you're harvesting, it's gonna rot. So there's just like a lot of management around infection, disease, rotting, and all these things, again, coming back to we may not survive, right? And how this differs from a lot of existing strategy games is they're abstracted, right? Engine building or strategy. And then my favorite example of abstraction, is a game where you build a house or a cottage or a farm, and maybe it takes 2 wood and 2 stone, right? Or 2 wood and 1 stone, right? Two wood and make a note over here we're talking about, and it's gonna come back to harvests and pumpkins. Right now we're going down digging a little bit into the abstractions of a lot of engine building games, a lot of resource management games, farming games. Removing the annoying details, right? So my family built a house when I was growing up, and there's a lot that goes into it. If you're historically building a house less than what a modern house would require, but everything from different it's funny, the level of abstraction was just like, it takes a unit of wood, right? Like a crate, like a 20 by 20 cube of wood, of logs or whatever, right? But you're building a log cabin, logs for the walls, you need the joust, the ceiling materials to seal up the cracks, the planks for the floors, the roofing materials, the stone materials for the chimney, initially, or if it's a very simple house, could be a dirt floor, all the furniture that goes into it. So there's a lot of pieces that are wrapped up in this construction. And most games, like the less simulationist games, won't get into the nitty-gritty of this. The more simulationist game tends to be is more simulating real life. The more it will deal with potentially some of those finer details. I think some people really get into and enjoy the simulationist aspect, where they want it to be more and more like real life. But a lot of these things don't necessarily make for good gameplay, right? So we're talking about, again, pumpkin, harvest, planting things, and enjoying the celebration and relief of victorious harvest, right? So the struggle and the stress, and then the celebration, right? That's kind of the emotional arc of experience that we're trying to go through here. And a lot of the mechanics, the more simulation, realistic aspects that we could throw into there would be random and frustrating, right? Because that's real life. Put that in bold out. Real life is random and frustrating. One of the last books in the Little House series, spoiler alert, I guess the book's from like 80 years old or something at this point, so I'm going to spoil it if you haven't read the books, but at the end of uh, Laura grows up and gets married, and they have like 5 years where things just like every year something went wrong. It was locust swarms, it was fires, it was seeds going bad, just year after year. It's just like, why me? Like, why am I being punished? You feel that in real life when your life is on the line, but even in games, if you have all these random encounters where it's like, okay, there's just going to be a huge flood and you're going to lose all your stuff. Not necessarily the kind of game that many people would want to play. Well, it could just be like Pumpkin Chaos, right? Gosh. If we don't come up with a better title, it's going to be the title for today. Pumpkin Chaos. Harvest. Pagan rituals around here. We have a very lopsided mind map going on. Real world simulation, I think I'll say. So it's a little exploration of this concept. We started out with Pumpkin, looking at some of the experiences, delving into what it might look like mechanically if we were to create a simulation of an actual harvest. There's a lot of resource management, harvesting, gardening type games where the harvesting is the actual planting and reaping is very abstracted. So that whole reality of all the things that go into planting and growth just completely pushed off to the side. You look at something like viticulture, right? It's like you plant your grapes, you harvest the grapes, yay, you make the wine out of them. There's no grapes that went bad. There's not enough water. There's not a lot of stuff in the in-between. So the question becomes, we're talking about what kind of game we're going to think of today. Is that an interesting thing to dig into, or would that just be frustrating? Too realistic, right? A simulationist game about pumpkin harvest. Construction goes into most farming harvest games. Realities of farming. And for my family, I also had gardens a lot growing up, and it was when I got more into helping to maintain it, there's a lot going into it. Even just picking the rocks out of the garden before getting the dirt ready, tilling the earth, like, are there enough nutrients in there, like the different plants that you're planting, what you plant next to something else, how much of each thing should you plant. One year when I was living at home as an adult, we had a lot of curcubits. I learned this term during my research. It's squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, and we had these horrible beetles that just completely swarmed and destroyed all of our curcubit plants, and just it was a little gross, so sorry for anyone who's grossed out by bugs, but it was just like not small bugs either, but like big beetles, just completely infestation, really. Yeah, I love how we started from pumpkin planting and harvesting, and now we're coming up here to bugs and infestation. Yay, let's make a game about infestation. Oh man, that's another nice experience, just the disturbing nature of being overrun. Slowly overrun, no matter what you do. And we didn't want to use any super harsh pesticides, right? So there was trying to remember all the things. I think there was traps that you could get. Tried doing the traps. tried doing literally vacuuming the beetles off of the plants with a shop vac. That was quite an experience. Say that you've never lived until you've sucked up hundreds of beetles from your garden using a shop vac. Alright, Senior Bob says, because pumpkins grow on vines, you could focus early on making the vine grow, capture sunlight, and later focus on making the pumpkins grow bigger. Having more pumpkins on a vine might limit the size of those pumpkins. It sounds like you want to go full Agricola, whereas my instinct is to focus on a more narrow aspect. My mind is super caught up and focused right now on this, the bugs and the drought and the sad. Did I put drought up there? I think I put drought up. And the drought and the sadness. I like, Senior Bob, where you're going with this kinder, more friendly game. And again, just focusing on the pumpkin aspect of it, right? I don't know what it is about pumpkins, but they're just incredibly compelling. The little ones, the big ones, just the brightness of the color of them, the shape, it's all very evocative. And, you know, not only are they nice to look at, they're durable, right? So they can hang around for a long time, and they're very tied into this harvest seasonality thing as a symbol that even in our modern times is very meaningful. I like what Senior Bob is saying here. There's, and again, when I'm talking about games on the show, if we come up with something that already has a game made about it, that's totally cool. We're starting for our mind map, we're coming up with new ideas, maybe there's a game that already exists. I was mentioning the fact that there are a lot of plant harvest games because I think if you do start to play more games, test more games, see the kinds of things that are out there, like I know of a game like Viticulture where it's about planting the vines, harvesting the grapes, making the grapes into wine, so it's that wine life cycle. What other planting, harvesting games? Now that I'm talking about it, I'm thinking a lot of games will use it more abstractly, just gardening and resources is part of a economic thing, something resource management you can generate. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there are more games that focus on the actual growing of a plant, because that's a pretty cool concept. Like Senior Bob was saying over here, your engine built a plant builder, right? So you're getting into the nitty gritty of actually having your vines here. And I have to say, like, I love pumpkins and squash in general, but I'm also a huge fan of the plants, of the way that they grow in this whole vine system, and they spread out over time, and then they'll get the flowers. Squash flowers are really cool. I know at least for zucchini flowers, you can eat the flowers. There's recipes for that. And then you'll get the little baby pumpkins or whatever squash you have on there. And they'll bud off of it and be like a little baby pumpkin. And then eventually it'll grow to be like a big pumpkin with like a very strong stem. It's just fascinating to see how big they can grow. Yeah. But with this idea that just focusing on the act of the plant growing and like build a plant, right? Putting pieces onto it and deciding how what shape it's going to take. The closest thing I can think of that makes me think of is like a kadama. But kadama's not, there might be berries. There's flowers on the tree. There's insects. It's not really about getting a harvest out of the tree. It's about attracting spirits, the kadama spirits, based on the look of your tree. But if you start with you plant your mound card here, right? Move this up so you can see. Mound card maybe has some things coming off of it, and take that same asymmetrical card layout and maybe you get vine cards you can put together, and they have offshoots, and on the offshoots you can put leaf cards. And mechanically, it would be about getting enough light and nutrients and space for your pumpkins to grow them. And this whole evolving over the course of the season. I would say it's kind of simulationist. Very focused pumpkin vine growing game. Start out with your mound card. Maybe you could get several. Have a chance to add more vein cards. Spread out your plant. Need to add a number of leaf cards. It also reminds me a little bit of photosynthesis when you're talking about getting enough light to your plants for them to grow. Kadama, photosynthesis, viticulture a little bit, just some references, other plant games, question mark? Leaf cards to support your plant. Scientifically, leaves perform the photosynthesis, which is how plant gets energy, and the sugars that it stores up the fruit, it stores in the fruit, which is the pumpkin. You add flowers that turn into pumpkins, like the seasonality of this, like the flower phase, like the growth phase and the flower phase. Pumpkins appear phase, harvest phase. So we're looking at a 4-phase structure here, which is pretty cool. Fertilization, question mark? Because the fruits will only, the flowers will only turn into pumpkins if they've been fertilized. And for some plants, there's who does the fertilization. Fertilization. Do you need bugs? And how close do we want to get to making it realistic, right? How many plants it's a little more specific, but certain species can't self-fertilize from one plant, so you need multiple plants for them to cross-pollinate. Multiple plants to cross-pollinate. Right, growth phase, building out your vines, and maybe have a couple of different mounds. Maybe just start out with like 3 plants. Maybe some of them die and you have to deal with that. Oh my gosh. It's so stressful. The jack-o'-lantern phase. Oh gosh, yeah. After the harvest, we'll call it the carving phase. What do you do with your fruits after you so ruthlessly pick them from the vine? Saving the seeds to plant again next year phase. Sarah Bob says, I've seen a garden layout where there is a wide path around the garden that chickens roam and are super effective at controlling insects. Oh my gosh. Ooh, yes. See, and that's great because you have chickens too, which everyone really enjoys. I love that's a great flavor thing, right? Just putting that in there where you have your chickens coming and eating the insects, and you can name your chickens, and maybe eggs as a side product. And then you have eggs for the pumpkin pies. Oh, yes. Are these pie pumpkins? Carving pumpkins, decorative pumpkins. Can you grow different gourds? Do you get mystery seeds that turn into something unexpected? Can you get a hybrid plant that grows different types of squash on the same vine? See, this is kind of ideation where we're starting from this idea where we have the very realistic, right? Something a lot of us have experienced before, even if you haven't had your own garden. You might have been to a pumpkin patch before, seen the pumpkins growing, get a sense of what that's like. But we don't have to stick with that, right? Wouldn't it be fun to be a little fantastical with it? Different gourds with different powers, maybe? Go the fantasy gourd game. I'm gonna put that as a potential pumpkin chaos. And then the fantasy gourd game. I like that too. And stuff like this, when I talk to people about ideation and innovation, is where I think that it gets very exciting. You know, if you go hyper simulationist with it, say I'm gonna make a game about growing pumpkins, and I'm gonna deal with the phases. If someone else comes at that design problem, you'll still make different games, because even if you start from the same place, everyone's always going to end up at a different place, but it's going to be much more similar than if you start from the seed. Get it? You plant the seed of the idea and then let it grow and see where it ends up. Alright, you have chickens that control the insects, which are event cards that can come up. Name your chickens, have eggs as a byproduct. Maybe good and bad insects. I don't like to judge, put value judgments on insects, because many have their own values for different reasons. But if you are trying to grow a garden, there can be ones that, again, I'm talking to those, I have nightmares about those curcubit beetles and just swarming and killing everything. It's like, we can live in harmony, you can have a little bit, I can have a little bit, I'm cool with that. But if you're decimating my plants, we're gonna have a tough time. We're not gonna be friends. yeah, it's a little hard to see in this picture. Oh, my pen. Urgh. What these different cards are, but you could, again, digging into a little more mechanically, could potentially have different markets with the different shapes of vines, the vine market. And then the leaf market, which could maybe be, the leaf's a little pointier. I'm like, it's been a while since I've seen a pumpkin leaf. Single leaf, maybe you could have one come off a vine here, and you have a couple of leaves. So double leaf power. Types of cards. Vine market determines the shape of your plant. Things need to be spread out, or there's overcrowding, which is definitely a thing. If the pumpkins are put too close together, if there's too many pumpkins on a vine, sometimes you gotta prune them down so that they can all get enough nutrients. Leaf market. How well your pumpkins grow. How fast your plant grows. Flower market. I'm not sure if these will be different markets now. Again, if you start to have ideas of what your game should look like, it's best to write down what they are and then go back and prune those ideas instead of just trying to decide. One of the important things that came up in my talk this weekend was there's different phases of design. There's coming up with ideas, and then there's cutting and judging those ideas. It's important to be able to do both so you can move forward on a design, but if you spend too much time agonizing over which is the right format for you're never going to get the game out there. So right now we're having individual markets. Flower market, something, not sure what that would be. Gourd market, just turn into different powers or values. I'm gonna add this, maybe the gourd cards are double-sided. Young pumpkin and mature pumpkin. So like as I'm picturing and visualizing this pumpkin growing game, I'm seeing your plant evolves in different phases. Like the first phase, it's like stretching out the vines and growing really quickly. Maybe you're trying to take up enough space. Yeah, let's build out that, since we're talking about that and thinking about that, and the feel of each phase. Vine phase, spreading out a lot, mostly vine cards, setting the framework for your plant. Maybe there's a spatial element, leaf phase, making your pumpkin, keep writing that, pumpkin engine, flower phase, planning pumpkin location, gourd phase for type of gourds. And again, having a bunch of different gourds on your plant, maybe it's too out there. That would be a great thing for testing to see if it's something that people connect with, or if it's something that people kind of push back on. They're like, oh, this is too weird, or whether it's just pumpkins. Element of like 2 ideas at the same time. Like, for your using them, I don't know which one to go with. Okay, first one is, I don't want to type this between each one, but between phases. There might be events, bugs, chickens, as we had noted before. Types of gourds. So we talked about different types of gourds, like plants, gourds that would typically grow on completely different species, right? For like the Jackby Little pumpkins, pie pumpkins, carving pumpkins, and then, oh man, I don't even know. I know what they look like. The spoon, the ladle gourds, all the decorative gourds, into other things like a zucchini, you know, if you want to get wild. Doesn't have to be different species, but you could have pumpkins with different appearances on your vine. So hand wave that a little bit more for just, I don't know, have magic in there, have a fantasy element to it, or you just, depending on how you place it, they will end up looking striped pumpkin, polka dot pumpkin, red or white pumpkin, putting pumpkins in jars so they take on a certain shape. There's some fun stuff that you can play around with. Okay. That's pretty cool. We got a pretty robust pumpkin vine creation game. Oh yeah, sorry. Senior Bob's posting, tweeting pictures of rabbits destroying this sad-looking pumpkin. I love it. Also, it makes me kind of sad. It's adorable, adorable and sad at the same time. All right. So that's just going into this idea of simulation for something, and it's a great place to start if you're trying to come up with design ideas and you're not sure where to start, you don't feel comfortable doing anything too crazy, is look at everyday activities, right? Play around with, just think of something. I've seen games about knitting, about making quilts, about cat cafes, cooking recipes. You can start from the kernel of just, this is what this activity is in real life, and going from there, come up with some cool ideas and mechanics. I'm seeing this right now, very visceral, similar to the Kodama layout thing, but I think there can be more games out there that use a non-linear layout, and I just love the idea of this pumpkin vine stretching out across the table. You can do very pretty watercolor art for it, and it's interesting because we had talked about a growth or harvesting game. We had a seasons episode a while back where the cards would flip over, or the more farther out you get, the season would change, and every new card that come up would be from the new season. And with this one, kind of similar to that vibe, you have your plant growing out, and you're adding stuff to it, but you're also changing things that have already been placed. So your tableau, right? Your changing things. So there's this evolution to it, right? It's really pretty vibrant, kind of growing picture, and then replacing the flowers with the pumpkins. And I also like the idea as far as round structures go, having not quite definitive phases. So you have your plant growing out, it's growing, and then at a certain point it switches over to, oh, I can start doing leaves now. There's some overlap between leaf phase and vine phase, for example. But then at a certain point, maybe with a token, with a card that's slipped into the deck that's at a undetermined point, but a little 5 cards down into the deck, for example, the leaf phase will be over. I think the leaf phase could go throughout it, but things like the flowering phase, right? That's very distinctive. Flowers only go for a certain point of time. So a little bit of push your luck element to the flower phase. You want to be adding on new flowers, but you need to support them as well. So you can't just like start taking all of the flowers and then all of a sudden you have nothing to, you have no new leaves. Like you can only take I'm trying to, again, thinking about this from a simulationist perspective, like how does real plant growth work? There's definitely phases where I'm putting a lot of my energy into growing new leaves, and now I'm putting my energy into flowers, and then the growth. And it's not mechanical in a way, it's like just leaves, just flowers. It's very natural, right? It's very organic, is a great way to put it. So it'd be cool to give the mechanics of it an organic feel, which can be tricky. Mechanics are often non-organic feeling because you need a more rigid structure. Turn round structure. Because again, you have to set up decks in a certain way, and you need to have variability in there, and it can be tricky to make all that stuff work out. You can always get leaves, but you can get more in the leaf phase. Maybe instead of individual decks, you have tuned decks, I guess I'll say. During flower phase, it's mostly flowers, and then some leaves. So it's more that if we're using a market structure for this, which we're not totally committed to, but you're just going to be seeing more flowers than leaves. So if you really need leaves, there's going to be a scarcity to that, or whatever, at certain times. You need to build your strategy around that. Round. Hello, Mace. I like your hair, thank you. Flowers are the short game and leaves are the long game. Play the long con. I'm playing leaf strat. going all in on leaves. You can you can have your flowers and your pumpkins. I don't need them. Leaf strat OP. There could be a fair, county fair judging aspect to it. This is funny. I'm like, well, it's going to come down to the pumpkins, but what if they could just judge your plant, you know, and you could shoot the moon, just have a very beautiful plant that never actually produces any pumpkins. Very pretty plant. Never makes pumpkins. Still get points somehow. I like that. I like working the scoring / end condition into the game mechanically. Thematically. Did I say thematically? Into the game thematically. I was like, why do I have all this extra space? Something I've been thinking about a lot and bringing up a lot on the show about. Somebody brought it up recently who I was talking to. What does it mean to win? What is the feeling or experience of winning the game versus playing the game? If you have a game that feels very organic and I'm building out my plants and I'm very invested in the fantasy of the game. Oh, hello again, cat. Oh my gosh. And then it gets to the end, and I'm just kind of like looking around and doing a lot of math. There's a lot of games that do that. Again, no judgments. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad, but I'm interested in kind of pushing the boundaries, playing around with that, and seeing if there's ways where you can get it to feel a little bit more like, get the feeling of harvesting the pumpkin and focusing more on, I feel good about the things I was able to do in the game, and that carries through to the end game. Good about the things able to do. And you still have score points winning to some extent, but that's not really where the focus is. It can be a little tricky because you can use points as incentives to get people to do the stuff of the game. It's a simple way for a lot of engine building games will have certain pieces be worth, it's like this one's very powerful, it's worth no points, this one's not quite as powerful and it's worth some points, and at a certain point you're switching over from generating advantage or engine to generating points, and it can be a subtle way to guide people over the course of the game if they understand how those types of games work, and strategically winning those games a lot of times will come down to turning your engine off, turning from generation to points at the right time. Pumpkin plant with no points. Pumpkin plant with no pumpkins equals pity points, right? It's like your new gardener friend. You planted all these things and was so excited about it, and they just never got to fruition. It was really sad. It's like, why are there no pumpkins? Why is it never pumpkins? Yeah. So if they're coming back to, long story short, coming back to this idea of a county fair, judging, bringing your produce, you can potentially have scorecards that will say, like, for this game, you know, we're looking for the biggest pumpkin, or the biggest, you'll get more points if you have a big pumpkin, or if you have a lot of different striped pumpkins, polka dot pumpkins, all those kinds of things. Okay, come on, get out of here. County Fair. Scoring conditions. Points for biggest pumpkin, and this can feel very thematic, right? So there's first, second, third, ribbons. Points for most pumpkin, for variety of pumpkins. You know, you set up your little stall, your little display, and you're trying to attract the eye of the judges, like in Stardew Valley. Attract judges with your wares. Most carvable pumpkin. Tastiest pumpkin. Pumpkin pie eating contest. Maybe this feeds right into a game. You grow your pumpkins, and the second part of the game is taking on your pumpkins and making pumpkin food out of them. Processing your pumpkins. Pumpkin pie, of course. Pumpkin ice cream. Pumpkin stew. Carving the pumpkin. Painting the pumpkin. What else can you do with pumpkins? Probably do pumpkin muffins. Oh my gosh. I'm just making myself hungry. Now we're back to food games, right? Always ends up as food games. Pumpkin muffins. Pumpkin cheesecake. Right, you see, pumpkins are great to cook with. Sidebar. If you never cook with pumpkin again, pumpkin chili. There's a lot of things, kind of like zucchini that way. I guess it's a gourd thing where they have not necessarily strong flavors. You can kind of sneak them into other types of baked goods or stews that have stronger flavors that cover up the gourd flavor, right? Converting pumpkins into pumpkin spice. Pumpkin spice conversion. Spice conversion. Pumpkin spice machine. That could also be a show title or a band name. It'd be a great band name. The fantasy gourd game. Pumpkin spice machine. I would say there's a band with that name. That's a good one. Or a band name generator. That would be a good thing to put in there. Most carvable. Alright, we're getting a little off the rails from our pumpkin vine growing game, but it seems like there's some good stuff there. I like the idea of having control over your plant, because that's, we're talking about being kind of simulationist with this game, but the interesting difference between a game like this and actual growing plants you have control. So if you're actually growing a garden, and that's the difference between a lot of games that simulate things and the things they're trying to simulate, you have a lot more control over what's happening. You have time. You know, in the real world, if bugs come and eat your plants, you got to deal with it right then. In the game world, often you'll have time, you'll have tools to deal with these situations. Just control on how big your plant gets, how many leaves your plants will get. So many weird things can happen when you're dealing with plants in nature. like you don't realize your plant's not getting enough sunlight, and it ends up being much smaller. And interesting thing about plants that don't get a lot of sun is they will flower later, and there might not be enough time in the season, depending on the length of your growing season, to finish maturing the pumpkin, right? Your pumpkins will be green by the time the first frost comes and the plants die. Or they might be getting too much water, or just too dry. The soil might not retain water, might be too wet. There's a lot of things that happen that make it so you don't have control. Pumpkin fries, made that up, but could be good. Ooh. Deep fried pumpkin. Pumpkin fries. That's a good question, because I know you can do fried zucchini. You can do either coins or just cut into slices and do a fry on that. Pumpkin gets pretty soft. I feel like you'd need some sort of structure, or put like pumpkin pie spice on just potato fries, and that'll be the pumpkin fries. Incorporate weather. Yeah, did I put the thing about events in here? Evolution of the tableau. Oh, because I was thinking about those two different things, yeah. Events between the phases, either defined. Weather season. Every season is weather season. Random. Weather events. Insect events. Soil. Power cards that let you water. Fertilize. Etc. I haven't really talked about watering too much, but maybe that just comes down to the names of the actions. Is the name of the action does a thing. Watering makes the vine grow. Fertilizer, fertilizing, I guess that's got dual meanings. It's a little tough. Makes the leaves grow. Some verb makes the flowers happen. I don't know what that would be necessarily. Another question for this is who you are as a character, which is something that a lot of games don't necessarily cover, but it can be interesting to think about. Who are you? Because in this, again, looking back at the control and how much control you have over a plant, it doesn't really make sense that you are a farmer. Could be a farmer, but that'll be a little weird. And your tools could be fertilizer, water, chickens, whatever. Or again, we could lean a little bit more into the fantasy aspect of it. You could be sprites or gods. Think of a god, like the god of this one pumpkin plant would be kind of funny. Sprites, gods, spirits. Spirits, the spirit of nature. Managing this plant, the spirit of this one plant. You could be nature itself. Or you can just not worry too much about who you are. I think a lot of games do hand wave it and don't worry too much about having a particular character. But it can be fun to play around with. Definitely a fox in a Beatrix Potter story. Samhain for a deity. I like those. Deck builder. We're gonna do a deck builder. Oh, why does it always comes back down to deck builders? You can never get away from those. Why is it always deck builders? That could be interesting. We're talking more about a tableau layout game, but could be a deck builder in the sense that you're building your plant as a deck. This is an idea I've toyed around with a little bit before about combining a deck builder and an eventual layout of the cards. End of the game, you lay your cards out. The thing about this idea is it does take a little bit of visualization skills, which can be tricky for people. Taking what you know about your deck and being able to picture how it will look on the table. It could be something similar to what I'm doing with my Split the Loot game right now, with you lay out the cards and at the end of the phase or the end of the season gather up the cards, shuffle them, and then build out your plant again. Weird, but interesting. Weather deck. A plant feature deck, and you need to cull out flowers after they aren't useful anymore. Yeah. All important parts of planting and growing thing. Kind of a sad part of it is having to take off those flowers. They just never turned into pumpkins. Never quite made it, place it with a flower, or have a cull action that does something mechanically interesting. Now I just want to draw a bunch of pumpkins in my notebook. I make a pumpkin game. Be cool too to have a interesting artistic bring in a bunch of artists for your pumpkins. The main thing about drawing a pumpkin is you put all lines on it, and that's how you tell the difference between a pumpkin and an apple, which look very similar if you're sketching them quickly and not working on your pumpkin sketching skills. This actually on the vine. Ooh, and I like it's got the little spriggy things on it too. Little corkscrew parts of the vine that just kind of curl off. I want to make those mechanical too. I forget exactly what those are, or the reason that those end up on the plants. And the chickens, calling back to the chickens, having those in there, walking around your plants, your guards over here. Corkscrew parts of the plants. have your army of chicken guards who patrol the plant. Game idea the second. I was thinking in the back of my mind, are we gonna be completely focused on this? We're gonna come up with another idea. Chicken, pumpkin, patrol. Second concept, branching off of the first concept. You have your plants, or chicken pumpkin control, say a chicken garden patrol. Chicken garden patrol. You have your garden that you're expanding. Have to hire chickens, hire/lure chickens to live in your garden. Infestations of bugs come. Hopefully you have enough chickens. Oh, a chicken. Hopefully you have enough chickens. You have to keep your chickens happy so they hang around. Like the chickens, a little tower defense feel? Question mark. Layout aspect where the insects are directional and come in from different entrances. New this is a thing now, the tower defense board game. New concept, tower defense board game, but it's a garden and you have chickens as your defense. But even for the original idea, we have the different markets, pumpkin, different types of markets, or different types of decks, say, because all of them aren't necessarily markets. The pumpkin vine, market, event, or deck. Event weather deck, and the chicken deck. Which it seems not entirely related to the growing of the vines, but I just love the idea of you having these chickens come out. If there's a chicken phase, the chickens come through and bestow wealth and beauty upon your pumpkin plants. I mean, if we do want to make the chickens a focus, which I do, because I think that's adorable, maybe instead of literal insect events or phases, the chickens have secondary effects. If you would lose a bud or a leaf, you don't. Because I want the chickens. The interesting thing, getting into the nitty gritty here of decks and randomization. If you have a deck that's weather and bugs and a bunch of different things mixed in there together, there's a chance that certain things don't come up in certain games, right? So how do you make the chickens be relevant no matter what happens? If you would lose, or have a weather phase and an insect phase, so the chickens are always, chickens seem important. Have to ruminate a little bit on exactly how to incorporate them, but lots of good stuff there. You need chickens to protect the pumpkins. Very important. Chicken duties. All the chickens have names and special abilities. Also very important. Names and special. So here's a design question, something that I think of a fair amount as someone who tends to build more card deck-based games. So if we have this, the composition of the, focusing here, the pumpkin vine deck, right? If I look at a sample draw from the top of the deck, you know, I start out, I'm getting mostly vine cards, the different shapes. Some have multiple vine portions coming off. Maybe one curves around. It's got some aesthetics. Maybe on the vine cards, you also have a bud or a nub? Nub question mark? Do you need particular sites where you can place an eventual leaf or pumpkin flower? Or will that just be any vine offshoot? Simple design questions you can test either way. So this is the draw of the deck. This is the first card, second, third, fourth, fifth. And then you start to get some leaf cards, still mostly vine cards. You might get a couple leaf cards in a row. This might be 2 leaves on 1 card. Come back to vines. And eventually, and getting this perfectly tuned into one randomized deck is going to be very tricky, because if you just mix together the vine cards, the leaf cards, the flowers, and the pumpkins, which just all come out any time, right? It doesn't make sense for the feel of the game that we're going for. So vines, and you have more leaves in here. Then you start to get flowers. Really pretty orange pumpkin flowers. You're still getting the occasional leaf. Another leaf, maybe a vine, or maybe the vines aren't in the deck anymore. Throw a vine in there for good measure. Flowers, and then maybe now you're starting to get baby pumpkins in the deck. So writing it out like this shows the evolution of what we want a draw to look like. You can also write it out in a list. We're using phases a lot for different things here, but different uses of the word phase. Phase 1, mostly vines, few leaves. Phase 2, mix of leaves and vines. Phase 3, leaves, vines, flowers. Phase 4, leaves, flowers, no vines. Phase 5, maybe have some leaves, flowers, and some pumpkins starting to come in. Phase 6, and there's distributions here, right? So fewer leaves and more flowers and pumpkins. Phase 6, use some pumpkins. Then phase 7, maybe just pumpkins. So if you're thinking about this being a simple card game, again, like I said, if you just mixed all those things together, there's no controlling the distribution of the things. Or we want to have these, we have 4 randomized items, basically, that come in different distribution curves over the course of the game. This is the kind of thing that's very easy to simulate digitally, but a little tricky if you want to get it in paper. You can do all sorts of cool formulas if you're doing it digitally to say, oh, I want, you know, if 3 cards have been leaves, make sure, or with each leaf, increase the chance of a pumpkin card showing up. So some games digitally, where you think that it's pure randomness, they actually play around with that a little bit to make a better feel for the game, because it turns out pure randomness can sometimes be a sucky experience and not exactly what you want to create. So for this, if we want each of these phases to be like this with the different distributions, we really need different decks of those things, which means setup, right? Which means we have to go through and put the right number into each, shuffle them up again so they're not, we don't know what the order of those cards are. But you can put numbers and things onto cards to make it a little easier to separate them out into the decks, but it takes time, right? Someone has to know not to shuffle all the cards together. They have to have a number on them. So this is a very interesting design challenge and something I would love to work on more and play around with mechanically, because solving that problem, making it fun. Can you make setup fun? Making it not be an impediment to a game. Impediment to the experience you're trying to create. I dig the decks for different phases. Thank you. Something I've seen games do, or at the very least, shuffle sections of a deck and stack those on top of each other. Or someone will put, like, say, put a card 5 cards down, or shuffle the bottom portion, shuffle something into that. So there's definitely been some advancements in deck shapes and deck tuning. But again, you need to do it in such a way that it's not so frustrating for this complexity of a game. Often you don't want a huge setup. You don't want setup to be more complex than the game ends up being. So definitely a lot of considerations to go into there. Seen in Speecherstadt. It's a pumpkin tree. I did not know that. I'll have to look that up, because I'm definitely interested in seeing the different ways that designers solve these problems. Alright, we came up with a couple ideas. The secondary idea of the Chicken Garden Patrol is still very new. Have to work on that one a little bit if that's something we want to move forward with. But we actually have a pretty good mechanical framework for this pumpkin vine creation game. And it actually, thinking about the flowers and the culling, makes me wonder if I can work my wilted flowers. You may never have heard of this, but for a while I was obsessed with making a game that incorporated the wilting of flowers as a mechanic. And this would be a cool way to have the fresh flower, and the flower, once it's gone to seed, to demonstrate that this flower will never become a pumpkin, which is kind of sad, but flowers only have so long to turn into pumpkins. It's a Feld game. Oh, of course it is. Yeah. So I think that we're in a good place with this idea. Went very literal with this one. Sometimes we go off the rails and come up with completely wacky stuff, but this is very focused on kind of trying to take the experience of gardening and plant growth and see if we can mechanize it in a very satisfying way, which can be a great foundation for a game. If there's something you're excited and passionate about, you can just take that, break it down, think about how it works in the real world, try to get as close as you can to that mechanically, and then from there, change things, build things out, see how you can still embody that experience, but also keep in mind play, fun, strategy, interesting decisions is a really important part. Like we said, in the real world, growing plants can have a lot of lack of control, and suffer a lot of consequences, like my mint on my balcony that's growing right now keeps giving me problems. I keep trying to solve it. It can be very frustrating. So if you're making a game that's meant to be fun, important to think about how much of the frustration of the real world experience you want to work into the game experience. As always, if you felt inspired by the stream and by the ideas that we came up with today, feel free to take anything you've seen here, run with it, develop it. If two people start from the same seed of an idea, it's always going to evolve into different things. I hope that this show is as inspiring creatively to you as it is to me. I really appreciate you all coming out every week and watching me doodle silly things and talk about board game design. Friday, our casual gaming stream, most likely not going to happen because we will be in Vancouver for Shucks. But next Tuesday, I will be back and streaming again as usual. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Bye!